Portfolio Composer, episode 173.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of the Portfolio Composer.
What it boils down to, I wanted to make sure that there was a reason why people wanted to continue using Facebook, because frankly, there have been some major events lately that have made me question whether or not, there was a great article where Mark Zuckerberg doesn't even know what Facebook is. And that's when it occurred to me. It's like, what is this? Is this social media or is this life?
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Portfolio Composer. I am your host, your coach, your teacher, Garrett Hope, and I couldn't be more excited that you have downloaded this episode and you're listening to it. If you are a composer or a creative, that includes performers, writers, authors, dancers, you name it, anyone who's out in the world creating things, you need to think of yourself as being a business owner, and that is the overriding philosophy here at the Portfolio Composer. I believe that we can take a lot of lessons from entrepreneurship and business ownership and apply that to what we do creatively as in our business lives also. I didn't say that very well, but I think you guys know what I mean. And that means how to market ourselves, how to network, how to manage our finances, how to be a business owner and think businessly. And there's so much to that. And this is over 170 episodes providing free resources for you. And there's the podcast and the group coaching and everything. So I really want to help you figure this out. And today's guest is pretty awesome, and I'm really excited to speak with him because he's been out in the world creating music on a variety of fronts for many years. And if you've been a long-term listener of the podcast, you will have heard him before. This is Paul Rudoi. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm excited too. Paul and two of his very talented cohorts from the all-men's group Contus joined me on the podcast in episode 50. This was back when the podcast was called Composer on Fire, and I will put a link to that interview in the show notes. But in that episode, we dealt a lot with how to communicate with performers, how to figure out and navigate commissioning cycles, and all those things. And Paul has gone on to have an incredible composition career and performing career. He has been deemed indisputably unique, confident, and innovative through the American Prize. His award-winning compositions have been commissioned and performed by various ensembles and artists worldwide and supported through grants from the NEA, the Jerome Foundation, the American Composers Forum, and ASCAP. His music is published through PJR Music, along with Graphite, Santa Barbara, Walton, Morningstar, and NCCO music publishers. Paul, I'm really excited to have you on here for so many reasons, but let's just catch up. What's been going on since we spoke almost 2 years ago?
Yeah, it's been a crazy ride. Well, I guess 2 years ago, that was my last year in Contus. To take a step back, I started in Contus. I was really lucky in that Contus was looking for someone desperately, and I was desperately looking for a job in 2008. And so I joined right out of undergrad at 22. And then 8 years later, I decided that it was time for me to move on and try to get a higher level degree that will instill some facts and not just my gut instinct and reaction to music. And so I went on to pursue degrees in composition and conducting here at the University of Oregon in Eugene with Robert Keir from the composition side of things, and Dr. Sharon Paul from the conducting side of things. And I have decided, and this is probably a great part of our conversation to have, but I decided to actually drop my composition side and only focus on my conducting. But regardless of that, I knew going in that my goal was not just to be a conductor and a pro vocalist and a composer, but also an entrepreneur to try to help people with certain aspects of their work in the field as composers and as conductors.
All right, there's a lot there I want to unpack. But let's start with dropping the composition major. Why did you make that choice?
So there were a variety of reasons, and I should say, and this is me being honest, not just saying it because I'm on a podcast, but it has nothing to do with the program. The program here is insanely good. It is a giant master's program filled with 75 credits. So it's a giant master's. I mean, most masters are 45 to 50 credits, you know?
Yeah.
And so I knew going in when I moved here that I would be here for 3+ years. But the main reason why I decided that I wanted to drop it was because I needed to get going with the other things that I wanted to get done. And I knew that I could take private lessons to continue my work as a composer if and when I needed. Whereas for conducting, I really did need another year of strict conducting work to get what I had learned in Cantus into my hands. I mean, Cantus is a chamber ensemble. And so I joked with Dr. Paul about this, that I could conduct a choir pretty well with my head because that's what we do in Cantus. But I needed to instill that sort of working habit into my hands and into my gesture so that I could do that on a more traditional front. But the main reason why I decided to continue in conducting was because in many ways that is a communications degree for the choral field. And what my goals are after I'm done, I guess in June, I'll be graduating. And my goal is to basically make public this project that I'm working on with my colleague, Tyler Flanders. It's an online platform called Consortio, which is a website where people can go and it's basically a Kickstarter for consortium building. So composers can pitch an idea and ensembles can grab onto that idea and support it, much like Patreon and a variety of other organizations. But the idea being they can help find other ensembles much more easily than currently you're able to do, so that you can make these projects happen. And that's been a thing that I have noticed is not available. I mean, you can do it through Kickstarter, you can do it through Patreon, but it's not geared toward composers and ensembles finding this together.
Oh my gosh, Paul, I literally almost jumped out of my seat. This is so exciting. And this, I think, probably...
Yeah, I'm excited.
Well, it's huge. And maybe this is what you meant by being an entrepreneur, because here's I think the best definition of an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is someone who looks at the market, sees a need or a problem, and then solves it. And then they offer that solution for payment. And so I think you're doing that.
Exactly. I think there was a moment, I think it was my second to last year in Cantus, and I was talking to my really good friend, Tim Takash, just over the phone, because at that point he had been out of Cantus for, I think, 2 or 3 years.
And he's been on the podcast too. Got to interrupt you. Got to promote that.
Yeah, with Jocelyn Hagan, right. Yeah. And both of them are fantastic pioneers of the commission or the consortium model. But I thought it was interesting talking to Tim. He was doing this really big commission, which everybody should definitely find this music. It's a beautiful piece. I'm blanking on the name, but it's a cycle of works, winter songs, basically. And he was trying to find one ensemble per state. And you think about how many choirs there are in America, that shouldn't be that difficult, right? And it wasn't difficult to find them, but it was difficult to find the ones that actually would really work well for what he was after. But if you have, let's say, a social media type website or a Kickstarter type website where you can search by all the different functions that your choir needs, or maybe your programming is narrative versus theme-based or whatever, and you're looking for a winter cycle, then you can search that in and you can find out that Tim is writing a piece that actually lines up with your programming deadline of a year and a half from now. So it occurred to me all in one whack when I was talking to him that there should be a website that makes it easy for people to find each other and not just Facebook, because I think that is the old model, but that's a whole other conversation we're going to have.
Yeah, we'll get there. But what excites me a lot about this is you're right. I mean, Kickstarter and Indiegogo are great for one-time projects, but they don't help with the reward system. It's hard to build a consortium. Patreon is amazing for ongoing creative work and content creation, but a composition is a one-time project. And so it's hard to build a Patreon model for multiple consortiums in a row. So I think this bridges those two platforms.
That's our hope. Yeah.
And so then do you also, I'm assuming you'll handle payment processing as a third party, almost in escrow. So then there's a level of trust and safety for the commissioning people who are putting money on the line. Have you guys thought about that too?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, basically, we're doing the idea is that we will be doing all the things that traditionally right now, more often than not, the composer is stuck with all of the admin work for a consortium.
Yeah,
I mean, you talked to Tim about that consortium that he did, and he had 42 or 43 choirs. He had to deal with all of the contracts. He had to deal with all of the payment processing. He had to deal with all of that himself. But a lot of that can be automated. I mean, it's 2017. It's about time.
Yeah.
So realistically, you don't even need to think about them as quote unquote contracts. You just need to think about them as agreements that you click OK and you read through it and you make sure that it all fits in line. Basically, the idea is there should be a way to keep everyone accountable. Composers should be able to, and I do think that the vast majority of composers are able to find a timeline that works for them so that it gives them enough time to make the music that they really want to, while also supporting the ensembles that are performing their works. Meanwhile, the ensembles certainly should be held accountable for paying the composer as long as they have the product in hand. It's a simple bartering tool. It's just, if I want this piece from you, then I agree to pay you when I get this piece.
Yeah.
And I think that it's by automating it, it's not making it less personal. It's getting that stuff out of the way so that you can make the art and make the connections and build a community quicker.
Oh gosh, this is so fantastic. One of the things that I believe really strongly in, Paul, is that we need to build a team around us because we can't do it all. And yet, as a composer, right, which means you're a business owner, you're stuck with endless hours of admin, right? Answering emails, everything you just described, managing contracts, dealing with personalities. And this seems like a way for the composer to automate and put this away so they can do what they do best, which is write music. Right.
And I think that it's important to note that this is a budding idea. We believe, Tyler and I really truly believe that this is an important next step in the way that music in general is commissioned in general in the 21st century. I truly believe, I've been thinking a lot about this because what I don't want is for any one party to sit there and say, you know what, I'm cheapening my product or my results. And realistically, there are valid considerations to be had when someone says, yeah, but if someone is writing a piece for me and 49 other ensembles, is that really personal? And my answer is, I think it is. The process of doing a commissioning consortium is still commissioning. You're still supporting someone in creating a work that, whether it's one choir or 50 choirs, you are creating a work that is the basis of their voices, what is available to them, finding a middle ground. In many ways, it's even more collaboration than just one choir. And then on the other side of things, I can imagine that there are some composers who would say, yeah, but does this cheapen my product if somebody pays, I don't know, like $100? What if it's the same price as an octavo? And my answer to that is, it may be the same price as an octavo, but if you have 50 choirs performing your music, is that not like a lot of marketing and a lot of opportunity for you to find more people that you might not have been aware of, or they might not have known you before this project? So in my mind, what this really boils down to is doing what social media marketing does, but instead of wasting your time marketing and hoping that the algorithms work in your favor, you can actually use your art form to market yourself. That's my hope.
Wow. That's great. And I mean, I think I could go down this rabbit hole for the next hour, but maybe after you launch, we'll get back on and then we can do that.
That would be great.
We're
going to be launching in August. That's our hope.
August 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'll be one of the first composers to sign up. I think it sounds like a great idea.
You should. It would be fun to have you. That'd be great.
Awesome. Well, now I've got to completely change tracks. I'm so excited. My adrenaline's racing. I think that's just such a fabulous idea. One of the things you mentioned, though, Paul, just a few minutes ago, was how Facebook seems like the old model of making things happen. What did you mean by that?
So I've been thinking a lot about this, and so I might say it correctly and I might not. But in my limited understanding, as first of all, everyone should probably say that to themselves before they say anything as huge as this. I believe that Facebook, instead of thinking about like Facebook as like the new MySpace or the new Friendster and that sort of thing, think about Friendster and whatever else was before that through Facebook and whatever else was after that as basically the first iteration of social media. And the reason why I say that is because what they were after was a very generalized view. They were trying to get as many people, it didn't matter really who you were. Think about LinkedIn too. LinkedIn is not based in any one, particular field. You can be in any field and be on LinkedIn. You can be anyone and be on Facebook. And while I'm not advocating for closed clubs of people trying to be cool together, which is funny because that's how Facebook started. What I am saying is I think that the next step is having a network of social media websites and connections that are based on your particular interests and or your field. So my hope is that consortium, the consortium building website that we're aiming for, is a first step toward basically these more specific genre and or field related social media sites, instead of having this all-encompassing site that tries to seemingly give you an unlimited amount of freedom when in reality they are keeping you in a very, very small box by addiction, in my opinion. In this way, you would think about it in terms of going back, hundreds of years to a bartering model or something where there's, when you think like buy local groceries, you are buying localized information, or you are connecting with other people in localized ways, maybe through the fact that you're a composer or you're a conductor, or you are an avid Star Wars fan, or you are an avid Nine Inch Nails fan. Whatever the case may be, there might be a social media component and website that is built more specifically for that group of people. And they're interchangeable and they're connected. That's what I think is the 2.0 of social media down the line.
That's really interesting. But I see two potential things happening. If there are multiple social media platforms, they basically become silos. So the first problem is we get ever more into echo chambers. It's like, here's my political stance. I'm only going to be in a group with those people. The second problem that I think might happen is that there's lack of diversity because of the echo chambers. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny that you bring that up because I was literally just reading a book about that, about the fact that like basically technology has brought us together and how if we're not careful, it will tear us apart. And my response to that is that yes, that could happen, but it's already happening. And that's the issue, is that without us realizing it, we didn't realize how crucial these algorithms were, that we had no idea what they were doing. And that's why I left Facebook, I left Facebook on a personal level, because I was realizing I was addictively trying to get like the next, 10 likes on a post. And it didn't have anything to do, the post maybe had something to do with who I was as a composer or what I did as a composer or a conductor or whatever. But I was after somehow beating the algorithm, which is amazing because the whole point is that supposedly by me releasing that information, I will connect with a community, and yet the algorithm secretly decides whether or not I do connect with it. And that's what I had a problem with.
And so you chose to walk away from Facebook entirely?
Well, I'm still on it from a professional standpoint, but even then, I think it's dying down, and I might just like have a page where I have, links to other things, and that's about it. And I mean, I'm definitely deciding to go against the grain a little bit, and I acknowledge that. I'm also acknowledging that I might lose some audience. But to me, going back to what I was mentioning in terms of these potential silos, if I had my druthers, I would prefer to have more control over my content and how it connects with people, and ideally I would love to make sure that these different smaller silos of clubs of people were still connected with each other, that it would not become siloed. Basically, by having silos of people, you learn more directly from these people, because how many times have you been on Facebook and you don't realize that someone posted this amazing thing until way late in the game someone said, oh yeah, this person posted it. And you're like, why didn't I see that on my feed?
Yeah.
Like, that's something I wanted to see. Why didn't Facebook allow me to see that? Ideally, you'll have smaller pockets that you can then connect with on a variety of levels. But at least there would be some control. The problem is there really isn't any right now. We feel like there is, but there isn't.
There is control, but we don't have the control.
Exactly. We don't have the control over who sees our content. We think we do, but it's all based on the luck of the draw. I mean, one of the main things that I saw was, as I was deciding whether or not to leave Facebook, was this amazing article from these people who invented certain aspects of social media, including the swipe down, like the thumb swiping down to refresh. That right there, the guy didn't disagree that it was definitely connected to the feeling that you get when you have a slot machine.
Huh.
Or you remember way back when, I don't mean to be depressing, but it's important that we talk about this stuff. Way back when, notifications on Facebook used to be blue, like the little tiny things up at the top right. Yep. They used to be blue. And then someone said, you know what, let's change them to red. And red, scientifically, it is proven that our brains register red as alerts.
Yeah, it triggers fight or flight response. Yeah.
Exactly. So in many ways, and I don't mean to, maybe it's because I've been in Eugene, Oregon for 2 years, but I do feel like it's important for us to acknowledge that while there are benefits to social media marketing and connecting the dots, it was funny. I was listening to your podcast with Marie, who is a wonderful friend of mine, and I'm so excited that she went on the podcast. And she had great things to say about social media marketing. But one thing that kept coming up was that, you just got to keep working at it, and then eventually, maybe, you might get an audience. But it's all that work that you're doing isn't necessarily, you can't quantify how much you'll get out of that, because the algorithms are not yours. So I know, all that to say, my hope is in the future, we can take charge in our own areas and connect the dots between each other on a more personal, specific level. I'm sending a lot more emails now instead of trying to do marketing on a social media platform. Right. But this is old school. I mean, people used to talk to each other in person. And so by sending an email or by calling people occasionally and just saying hi, that's a huge step forward.
It is a huge step forward. Well, moving forward by stepping backwards, maybe?
Sure.
Yeah. This is really interesting. It strikes me that this is something that Ron Paul might argue if he cared about social media.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah, I think that's it's so idealistic.
Sure.
Though. It's so idealistic. And I think that the bigger issue is that while we say deregulation is a great thing, really what I'm after is that, I was reading an article the other day in preparation for this podcast, and they were saying that basically the issue is not like right now, because of the whole craziness associated with politics and fake news involved in social media, people are saying, or these companies are saying, well, we're going to make more advanced technology to make sure that this doesn't happen. We're going to weed it out through technology, which in and of itself is really fascinating to me, because that's what got us there in the first place. And I'm not saying technology is bad. What I am saying, though, is that it really boils down to the humanity of the people who create these tools. I mean, when you have these inventors saying, yeah, I definitely thought of that while thinking of a slot machine, he also regrets that that's the case. So it's like looking, hindsight is 20/20, and ideally we can prepare for that in advance. So I wouldn't have any problem with somebody regulating, say, a social media website that focuses, and I'm thinking more like, CoralNet that ACDA has currently. It would be great if those forums were in more of a social media capacity, but they were still open to linking to non-Coral, companies or websites, or organizations. That would be great. It's this like actual web of different smaller organizations that are connected in a variety of ways, rather than everything coming into one giant organization.
Fascinating. So how do you approach this from the business side then? Because you say you're keeping your professional page, but that's becoming ever more minimal. You have to recognize that Facebook has allowed us to connect with more people around the world in an easier way. And you need to take advantage of that as a composer, or do you disagree with that?
No, I completely agree with it. I mean, think about it this way. When I decided that I was going to leave, I did an odd thing, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be good. I didn't know if it was going to be okay with people. I didn't even know if I was okay with it, but I decided that I was going to leave 30 days before I left. The idea being that if I'm going to leave, part of the issue with social media and the genius of social media is that when someone says, you know what, I'm done, they leave and nobody knows why, and nobody can understand like what they need to do or how that might affect them. I mean, you think about everybody trying to change each other's minds, or at least like inform each other by posting. Well, you can't post on a profile that's gone. So my thought was, well, spend 30 days basically going through the process of breaking up with Facebook and talk about what that's going to mean. And so for me, a lot of those 30 days was actually dealing with Facebook's platform so that I can gather, say, everyone's email address that's available. Because I know that there are a lot of contacts in there that I needed, or supposedly needed, although we can talk about that in a little bit. But between that and, frankly, birthdays, because I'm horrible at remembering anything, and a variety of other materials that you have, but it's actually fairly easy for you to download all of your data that you have had from the beginning of your time on Facebook. It's actually fairly easy to do that. So people worrying about, not having their images or their videos or any of that material, anything that you've posted is already available for download. You just have to go to the right place and download it. But in terms of like creating a brand as a composer, to me, the most important thing was to download those email addresses, because then I can connect with these people and remind myself of who I knew and how I know them. At this point, what I'm doing is I'm just going pretty old school, and I'm making sure that I'm connected with ACDA, regionals and local and national, and all these other organizations, NCCO, and actually doing some active detective work to find them and remember how I know these people, which is actually a really, really good thing. It's surprising to me how little I actually actively remembered while I was on Facebook. It was actually really hard for me to remember how I remembered this person, because Facebook would just give me all of that information, whereas now I have to search it out, and therefore I remember it a lot more clearly. It's really, it is that work, but I'm thinking, in response to Marie and other people who say that it's necessary, and I completely understand why you would think that, but what if I spent those 2 hours a day, instead of doing that, connecting with these people one-on-one? 2 hours is a lot of emails. Not that I want to do 2 hours of emails, but that's an example. That's a lot of emails that you can send to people and make them personalized, or maybe give them a call, or maybe even just text somebody. Like, that's a huge thing. Hey, I'm thinking about you. I hope your program is doing well. When is your Christmas concert? I hope that, it's going to be fun, or whatever. That's important. And that's way more personalized sometimes than just reminding yourself that someone exists based on a post that you sometimes found.
Well, I don't know if that's the right way forward for all composers, but it seems to be your way forward.
Yeah, it definitely works for me, but it's a great point that, like, I assumed that once I left, it wouldn't matter much. And even if I was still there for 30 days, it wouldn't matter much. But what I did really care about was whether or not people would think about it. And it's funny, like there were a lot of people who would say, well, how am I going to get in touch with you? And then I said, Mom, you have my cell phone. For instance, and that's what it's come to. And I think that's why I wanted to make sure that my process was at least there for an amount of time where some people could digest it. Although again, I have no idea just how many people saw that based on the algorithms. So it sounds like I'm a bit jaded, but really what it boils down to, I wanted to make sure that there was a reason why people wanted to continue using Facebook, because frankly, there have been some major events lately that have made me question whether or not, there was a great article where Mark Zuckerberg, they said that the article said that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't even know what Facebook is. And that's when it occurred to me. It's like, what is this? Is this social media or is this life in many ways? And I think it's been really eye-opening. There are definitely things that I miss. For instance, apparently there's a Messiah sing at a friend of mine, at a house of a friend of mine here in Eugene that I didn't know about until last night because somebody said it.
Right, and the event was on Facebook. Yep.
And it was definitely a Facebook event. Yeah. So, do I want to be emo and like not go? No, of course I want to be connected with people, but it's the choice that you make. And that's okay. There's no wrong way to go about it.
Right.
So,
well, I knew you were leaving Facebook because I saw your very first post. And I know that you posted every day for 30 days and you would give rationale and you would provide links to articles with research saying this is what social media is doing. This is also how you can retrieve your data and on and on. But over those 30 days, and you and I have been friends for a couple years on Facebook now, and we've had a minimal, not a lot of interaction, but mutual likes and shares and so on, which means Facebook tries to show our feeds. I probably saw 1/3 of everything you posted.
Right.
And I think that's validating your point of these algorithms just trying to feed us stuff.
Yeah, and sometimes it also has to do with how much time and how much interaction you do on Facebook. The algorithms aren't just for the posters; it's for the people who work. If you do spend 2 hours on Facebook liking and commenting on people's stuff, and then when you respond, when you post something, if you've done a lot of connections with other people, you will have more people connecting with you. That's just the name of the game. But it is really interesting just how it's just hard to wrap your brain around. Wait a second, I actually have absolutely no control on who sees my stuff unless I tag them, which is really funny because sometimes tags also don't work. It just depends. Like if you're tagging somebody that you're not friends with, there's a different set of algorithms. It's really weird.
Or you have to pay for people to see it.
Well, yeah, and that's a whole other thing. It's like, as now that I only have, technically I have a personal page right now, but it has 0 friends and it is like unsearchable. And the only reason why I have that is because, again, the genius of Facebook, I can't have a professional page without a personal page. So I had to keep my professional page alive by creating a new account and then like basically going through 2 weeks of making sure that, there were random settings that were changed so that I was able to be found. So some people started to find me on search, even though I definitely said no, and I had to continually say no and go back into my settings and change them. But I thought it was really interesting that that my professional page now, Facebook is going toward the boosting model where basically, unless you're a really, really big deal, you're only going to have people see your stuff if you boost your posts.
It is.
It's just really, really interesting.
Well, it'll be fun to kind of track this with you over time, and we should touch back in next August when you launch Consortio, but we can also talk about this, like what has been the impact and how have you moved through some of the challenges. We don't know what the future is going to hold, but the internet and social media is here.
Right, yep. And I think that it's a big experiment. It really is. It's a big experiment, and to be frank, like it's 2017. It hasn't even been. I guess this is the 10-year mark, I think, the 10-year mark or so when I guess it's 12 or 13 years that I was on Facebook. And so while it's been a long time, it's been over a decade, it doesn't feel like it. Like we're still trying to figure this out, the whole social media and internet thing. And it's continually shifting and changing. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes. And the other thing is a positive thing maybe that we want to end on. More people are connecting with me in other ways now. And I am doing the same. My parents now call me more often. I call my parents more often. I talk to my friends in Minnesota and on the East Coast from my alma mater and down in Arizona where I used to live. I talk to them more often. I text them. It's okay to text and be like, hey, thinking about you, and that's it. Like, that's a thing. Remember I used to do that, and I forgot about that because Facebook was just available. It's amazing what your brain does.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I don't want to leave quite yet because you're a composer who has been active professionally as a performer and conductor, and this is where you're going to head once you graduate. You're going to continue to do this. And so I kind of wanted to ask you a question that I ask a lot of the guests, but what are 3 business tips, and you can relate this to social media if you want to, that composers could do today to move their business forward?
Okay, well, number 1, and this is just because of where I started composing. I mean, I really didn't start composing truly until I was in Cantus. So this is what I'm used to, and I know this may be scary for some composers, but I would highly recommend finding those ensembles and directors that you want to work with, or maybe that are within reach. You know, maybe Craig Hella Johnson might not be within reach, like in the moment, if you're a brand new composer, but somebody near you who has a semi-professional choir, actually you do have a connection with, and I would actually ask them what piece they want, not related to your style, related to what they want. Maybe they're doing a narrative program. And this happened all the time in Cantus, is why I'm referring to Cantus. But all the time we would say, wow, there's a hole in this program and we need something that is kind of basically a pivot point between this piece and this other piece. And I would say, yeah, I'll find a text and I'll set a piece for that, you know? And it was a great exercise to find a piece and write something that was emotionally and musically gratifying in connection with the other pieces around it. So build in an opportunity for you by basically allowing these ensembles and directors the ability to think up what would the ideal piece be, and then you fill in the gaps. Mm-hmm. That's number 1. Number 2, I would say it really does pay to have a great website and a great brand. And if you don't really know how to brand, I truly believe that you do. It's just like I believe that everybody's a composer. They just haven't figured it out yet. But that's just me. Sure. So I think that by figuring out a brand, you just have to sit down with somebody who knows. I mean, frankly, I had a great session with Jake Runestad while I was in Minnesota in Cantus, and I talked to him about all the things that he needed to do, and he introduced me to MailChimp. He introduced me to his brand and like why he does what he does and how he does it. And it was really useful to me because I'd never had any sort of education in branding. But it became very clear to me that the simpler, the better, because the more people can see your logo or what types of music that you make in relation to what it look like, what it looks like, the better. And it's not cheapening your product. In fact, if anything, it's creating an aura that means something to you. Yes. If you see your brand and you say, yeah, that looks like the sound that I hear, that's important. Yeah. You know, so you have to think a little bit abstract about it. And just for the people who are listening, branding has come up regularly in some of the podcasts. And if you go to theportfoliocomposer.com and in the search bar, type in brand or branding, you'll get a list of podcast episodes where this has come up. And there are other resources that I'm in the process of making that will help you do this exact thing that Paul's describing. But Paul, back to you. 3rd tip. Yeah, I mean, branding is so crucial. I'm so glad that your podcast repeatedly brings that up, because I had no idea. The only reason why I really knew that was because in Cantus itself needed to be, we had a couple rebranding while I was there, a couple different versions of rebranding. And it became crystal clear to me that people responded to that, which was great. And I guess the third thing for me is that I guess it's related kind of to the first point. Obviously, if you ask somebody that you know, if you can write a piece for them, and you say, yeah, and I would like to write it for you, if you have a hole in your program, that gives them the right to say, yeah, we really need like a reggae tune that's also with the contrapuntal aspects of Bach. We need that in that spot. And then you say, wow, I can't do that. Well, guess what? You can. And that's the whole point, is that by doing these things, by having very specific limitations on what you can do as a composer, then you will start to find your own voice. And that's how it worked for me in concerts. Regularly, I would need to arrange pop and rock tunes in a classical vein, or I would need to take a very classical piece and arrange it in a much more popular style. And as a result of that, I basically taught myself composition through the help of all of the members of Cantus. I think it wouldn't have happened if they weren't there. But it's crucially important that you don't limit yourself to one genre, to one style. Like, try to imitate composers. Stravinsky was always right, and you know it. And it's crucial that in order for you to learn, you really do have to learn how to feel. Yeah. And then you'll find yourself, yes. You know?
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Paul, is there anything else that you wanted to say today that I failed to ask or we didn't go?
Man, I don't know. I think we covered a lot of ground. I obviously had so much to say. I'm sorry. I just kind of throws up out of me.
Don't worry about it. That's fantastic.
Oh man. Yeah. It's been so much fun being on here. I think the biggest thing for me is that, don't let social media or the lack of social media get you down as a composer. There's no right answer for making it. I mean, for me, I had very specific views of how I wanted to market myself and how I considered certain things. Actually, this is a really good thing to talk about. It's basically like, what do you consider valuable as a composer? Like physically or financially viable and valuable. To me, there are different ways that you can market yourself. There are different ways that you can publish yourself, right? And to me, there were very specific things as I was getting into the composition business that I knew. Number one, it was fine for me not to get paid for like 5 years, as long as I got really good recordings of my works. Because to me, the recordings, it became very clear to me that it proved, good recordings proved that my music was actually singable and that people liked it. Like, Matthew Curtis is great because he allows, from choral tracks, he allows you to hear it in voice, which is way better than just like a MIDI accompaniment. Yes. But the test of time is really to have choirs and ensembles perform your music. And so if you can get good recordings of that, those are invaluable. They are way, way better than getting $1,000 or whatever for your first commission. And the same goes for publishing. For me, I was determined to write pieces that fit particular publishing houses. So I was really excited when Yonder Come Day, my like one spiritual arrangement, and I probably won't ever do another one because I don't think it's like the right fit for me as my particular demographic. I think there are other people who can do it way better. But I had something to say, and I wanted to do a spiritual, and so it fit really well with ECS and NCCO's publishing house. Like, that was what I wrote it with that in mind. You know, or Media Manayo with Walton. Like, I knew that Walton would be an ideal publishing house for this, and their audience would be interested in that piece. So by doing that, I've had my name in a variety of other publishing houses, but I've kept the vast majority of my work in my self-publishing PJR music. And whether or not that has been really successful, I don't know. I felt like it's been successful, but you never know. But for me, it was more of a marketing ploy. If I didn't make any money off of those, that's fine, as long as they were in those publishing houses. So it just depends on what you find viable financially and how you want to, again, brand yourself, how you want that brand to be out there in the world.
Yeah, you basically introduced a topic for a whole nother podcast episode. But it's really good advice.
Well, anytime, Garrett.
Yeah, I love it. Paul, I'm so thankful that you've been able to join me on this podcast today and to talk about these things. But we need to take a quick break and we'll come back for the lightning round.
Sounds good.
Hey folks, I want to invite you to join the Portfolio Composer community on Patreon. You can find out more at Patreon, patreon.com/Portfolio Composer. This is a way for you to support the show. If you listen to the podcast and get any value at all out of these interviews, then please consider just donating $1 a month so that I can continue doing this at an ever higher level. I have lots of plans for 2018, and I want to produce more content for you guys and better content. And if you donate at a higher level, you can participate in the group coaching plans. And so that is a pretty fantastic resource. I hope you consider it. If you've been on the fence at all, please consider just joining the Portfolio Composer community at patreon.com for $1 a month. It would mean a lot to me.
Welcome to the lightning round.
Paul, if you could turn back the clock, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
I would just say don't care so much about anything and just kind of go. Because I often found myself stuck because I was too nervous about trying something or going outside the box. And then I was just sitting there, a year from then saying, why didn't I do that? Just do it, whether it's composing or otherwise.
Yeah, I think I had the same problem. What is a personal habit of yours? Seriously, what is a personal habit of yours that you feel leads to your success?
Nico Muhly and subsequently John Corigliano has this obsession, and I completely subscribe to this. Nico talked about how he obsesses with a certain rhythm or a certain melody or a certain harmony, and basically every piece that he writes is a response to that obsession, and I completely agree with that. I will get obsessed, often with something that Tormes has written, Elio Tormes, and I just listen to it over and over and over and over for like weeks on end. Brittany, my wife, will attest to this, and she often is like, please just turn that down. And as a result, that's obviously, I think that's honestly one of the things that makes my music successful, because it's basically a theme and variations, or it's a response to something very small and very meaningful to me.
You're a vocalist, and what instruments do you play or have you played in the past?
Honestly, it has really just been me singing for a long time. I have to take piano here, and that's always scary, but that's been my go-to instrument.
So what instrument have you always wanted to learn to play, and why?
So as a joke, I will say Bobby McFerrin's voice. I'll just leave it at that.
If I had that as available to me, yes, I would do that too.
Right. Yeah. No, I think talking about turning back time, honestly, objectively, I really wish that I had spent more time in front of a piano when I was younger. But I think if I had to choose right now, as cliche, well, no, I guess it would probably be a viola. I think they're very much they like altos in the choir. Sometimes they're given like one note, but they're capable of so much more, and they have such a rich quality to them.
Yeah,
I would love to play the viola one day.
Oh, good answer. I got to see Bobby McFerrin live, and that was one of the most transformative concerts I've ever attended. And my daughter has this.
Isn't it amazing?
Oh, I don't even have words.
It's so funny how many people just know him for like a couple things, like "Don't Worry, Be Happy" or whatever.
Right.
But then you YouTube him, and he's a gift to humankind.
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
My daughter has this lullaby CD that we play every night, and there's this Bobby McFerrin track that opens the CD. So every single night I get to hear Bobby McFerrin, and it's wonderful.
You could do much worse than that.
I don't get tired of it. And let's see, she's 10. So we're talking over 3,600 nights of listening to this music. And
that's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. So this next question often can be really challenging to answer, but Paul, I'm looking for those pieces that gave you those time-stopping, breath-stealing moments. And I think if you really love music, you've had those moments too. And those are the pieces I want you to name here. So what are one or two of the pieces that gave you those transformative moments?
Yeah, so I have to say there are three, but they're they're for very specific reasons.
Okay, that's fine.
So when I joined Cantus, I was 22 and didn't know anything about, men's music or anything. And right away we were singing Velho Tormes, and we sang Songs of the Ancient Sea by Velho Tormes. And that piece absolutely blew my mind. And it was within, I think it was Tormes, right? Singing Tormes that made me realize that I wanted to be a composer. And going back to what I said earlier in this episode, where I said that everybody's a composer, they just don't realize it yet. I think this is the reason why I believe that. It's when I listened to Tormes, I never thought I was a composer, and yet I started to hear form. I started to hear a piece in form rather than in just like a melody. But the thing is, Tormes also doesn't write just form. He writes melody, he writes harmony, he writes amazing rhythms. He writes it all, but it's in such a clear form that all you can do is feel it in your body when you're supposed to shift into the next part of the piece. And Songs of the Ancient Sea did that for me, and I couldn't stop listening to the piece. We would be done with rehearsal, and I would just go home and listen for hours on end to that piece and other pieces by him. Also, check out Double Dedication. But the second piece that I was obsessed with and continue to be obsessed with is Rudoi by Jaakko Mäntyjärvi. And that piece it's literally called Rudoi. So it's a play on a Lapland, northern Finland Lapland song called a yoik. And when I say that, it's not an arrangement of a yoik, it's just basically making kind of fun of a Finnish folk song. But the amazing thing about the yoik is that it is nonsense. It's a folk song, or it's a folk song tradition that doesn't involve anything other than nonsense syllables.
Wow.
And that blew my mind. The more I listened to it, I said, wow, this piece is so cool and so full of life, and it has nothing to do with anything. I just kind of lost it. I lost it when I listened to that.
Can you help me out by spelling that and then the composer's name, because I've never heard these before?
Oh my God. You are going to lose it when you listen to this. So it's pseudo, like Pseudo, and then it's dash, and yoik is Yoik.
Okay, and the composer's name?
And the composer is Jaakko Mäntyjärvi, and Jaakko is Jaako, I believe, and Mäntyjärvi is Mant. I think it's Jyarvi. I'm not quite sure, but both of those A's in the middle of the last name have the little umlauts over them.
Okay.
And he's actually known for a variety of other pieces, but my God, that piece just blows my mind because it's about nothing, and yet it's like the most addicting. You should listen to the Milliken Choir. I'm not biased at all because my brother was in the Milliken Choir, but anyway, you should listen to the Milliken Choir's version on YouTube.
Okay.
It's great.
I will. What's the third piece?
I was thinking about this. There really isn't a third piece, but it's the Bulgarian Women's Choir, the Mystery of Bulgaria, and they went on Johnny Carson like way back when. And when Cantus went to Oman in 2015, I think we went to Oman and we sang in the like basically the palatial National Opera space, opera center, and it was a part of a choral celebration, I think, and it had Sweet Honey in the Rock before us, so we had dinner with them as we like flew into Oman, and then we saw the concert for somebody who was directly before our concert, and it happened to be the Mystery of Bulgaria Women's Choir, and you should just listen to that entire album, their first album that came out, I think it's in the 1970s. It is an unbelievable album full of folk songs and harmonies and rhythms that you can't think that stuff up. It's just so cool. The other thing is when we saw them, there were, I swear to God, I think there were 90-year-olds in that choir, like people who had been there from the get-go, and they would walk on really slowly, and then they'd sing, and it was so bright, it like peeled paint off the walls. I couldn't believe it.
Well, that sound, the Bulgarian women's choir sound is very unique.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
It's definitely not bel canto.
No, it's not. Nope.
Wow. Oh my gosh, I look forward to listening to that. Can you name a piece or a composer who is minority or female that you think we should all listen to and know?
Yeah, I mean, luckily, there are so many that really should be known.
Absolutely.
But I would say of them, I'll name two, and one of them being female is Edie Hill. And Edie Hill has always been, in my mind, one of my favorite composers of all time. She wrote a piece for Cantus called "A Sound Like This" that I sang off and on, and it's a cycle of pieces with translations of different mystic poets by Robert Bly. And that piece is unbelievable. I mean, it's one of the most profoundly spiritual experiences you'll ever have, and it's on the album While You Are Alive. But one of those movements, called Clay Jug, was recently recorded on an entire album of Edie Hill's music called By the Crossing.
Yeah, with Donald Nally.
And right, yeah. So you should look up on YouTube Clay Jug, Edie Hill, The Crossing. And I can tell you right now, it is one of the most surreal experiences listening to that piece, because it's great in TTBB form, like the original Cantus version, but the SATB version, she just killed it. It's amazing.
I agree.
So I'd recommend that. And then, yeah. Oh, so you know this piece?
I do, and God. I've interviewed Edie. She's been on the podcast.
Incredible. Oh, she's so cool.
Amazing.
Oh my God. I love her. She's like my favorite bird. She's just my favorite. She's one of my favorite people ever.
Yeah.
So in the other person that I highly recommend is Sidney Guillaume.
Oh, I know Sidney too.
Yeah, he's a Haitian American composer, and he's now in Portland. He's actually going to come down and work with the University of Oregon Chamber Choir next term on one of his pieces, but called Chaka. But like his whole oeuvre, I'm pretty sure almost every one of his pieces, the text comes from his father.
I think that's what he told me too. Yeah. He's been on the podcast also.
That's awesome. Oh my God. I'm going to have to listen to that podcast now. But he's such a cool and wonderful dude. And he also, the fact that he chose something so intimate as his father's poetry and his father's writings, I mean, that shows a level of personal that I certainly haven't had in some of my works, although I'm getting better about writing my own poetry and that sort of thing. But I don't know. It's all of his music is great. So.
Agreed. Well, those are two composers that are also getting performed a lot. They're writing high quality music that people want to do.
Yeah.
I think books are one of the most untapped resources available to us. And so I love getting book recommendations. Can you name a book that could benefit the personal, creative, or business lives of the podcast listeners?
Yeah, I think I know this is pretty, it might be kind of down, but it's important that we acknowledge it based on what the rest of this episode has been. But this book that I had mentioned, it's called Who Can You Trust? And it's by Rachel Botsman, Botsman. And I'm reading it, and it's such crucial reading. It says, Who Can You Trust? And it says, let me get it out here. Yeah, it says how technology brought us together and why it might drive us apart.
Wow.
What's great is that it continues to have hope for the future, but it's also acknowledging where we are, both the good, the bad, and the ugly, about where we are currently in our technological advancement in the 21st century. And related to what I was saying, it's crucially important that people really consider it, whether you're a composer or you're not a composer, but in this case, for composers, you need to weigh the pros and the cons of the kinds of materials and the kinds of services that you are using, and whether or not you agree with whether or not you should use them. I think that's a very hard distinction to make, but it's important.
That's a tough question.
Yeah. On a whole other plane, there's a book called Into the Woods, and it's not. Although that is my favorite musical. There's a book called Into the Woods, and I can't remember the writer. Let me see if I can pull it up here. Yes, by John York.
Okay.
Yorke. And that is the opposite. basically a journey into 5-act structure. So for composers who are thinking about doing large form works, this is a crucially important book because it explains how large form things like movies, like plays, how those things are, the most effective ones are done really, really well with 5 acts. And he has great, what's the word where diagrams, things like that give you some indication as to pacing, which I'm obsessed with pacing when it comes to writing. Like if somebody feels like it's taken too long to get somewhere or too short to get somewhere, the rest of the piece is moot. Like you have to feel that pacing correctly. And these 5-act structures, the ones that he suggests in this book, they basically are the pinnacle of making it really, really effective. You're talking about like The Godfather or Thelma and Louise. Like these are really, really important movies for a variety of reasons. One of which is because the pacing is perfect. So
I wonder how that fits in with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey philosophy.
Yeah, I think it's similar.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's important. It's important to acknowledge this. Yeah, it's important to acknowledge the journey, but also the moments in the journey that make up the journey rather than just the beginning to the end. Because often we think about that. It's funny. I was talking to Tim the other day, and I mentioned something that he had brought up, Tim Takash, that he had mentioned a while ago when I first was starting to write. I was like, what do you think about when you start to write? And he says, the beginning and the end. Like I think about how it's going to start, and I think about how it's going to end, and I put the pieces together in the middle. But the pieces together in the middle are often the most important thing.
Yeah. I read a lot, nonfiction and fiction, and one of my favorite fiction writers is this British author named Ken Follett, and he does a lot of pulp fiction, but he's got this one book called Pillars of the Earth that is phenomenal, and that's actually where we got our daughter's name and all these other things, and I was listening to an interview with him, and he has this thing where he believes that good fiction, the pacing is something like this, that every 7 pages, something should happen. And for him, that's kind of an overriding philosophy so that he knows, okay, I can get so many words in or to describe this thing or have something happen, and then something else has to happen. And that keeps people turning the pages. And I've tried to think about that in terms of music and possibly this 5-act structures. Like, how do we pace it so that people want to listen for the next minute? What do we do to keep things going?
It's a really, really fascinating question. I mean, like first of all, I love Ken Follett. Like his Century trilogy is awesome.
Yeah.
But I find that's one of the big questions that we have to ask ourselves as composers, because it's not that your audience is more important than you, but because of my time with Cantus, it is very apparent to me that composers need to be humble enough. Speaking of Kendrick Lamar, you need to be humble enough to acknowledge other people's viewpoints, and their viewpoints not being in your music is the most important thing. Like you may love what you do, but connecting with another person on your music at the same level is way more valuable, in my opinion. And it's really, really good to get that pacing right. And sometimes that means like giving a person a draft and then being open to them saying, wow, that whole first part doesn't make any sense to me. And then acknowledging it and trying to figure it out from there. But the other thing is like, come at it from a variety of different points of view, like maybe take 2 days off and come back, or maybe take 1 minute and just mess up something, take out 10 bars and see what it feels like. Those weird things will help basically solidify the piece for you. That's what works for me anyway.
Yeah. Well, we could, again, another podcast episode.
Yeah.
Paul, where can people find you on the internet, and how can they get a hold of you?
Well, it's easy. Just pauljohnrudoi.com. That's my website. And from there, I have a blog as well, The New Muse. And through that right now, you can also look up Consortio at consortio.io. We were hoping for consort.io, but it was already taken. So Consortio.io will also give you that aspect of things. And I'm also working on a couple other things, Musmatics survey, which basically the idea being that there's a lot of old music, Baroque and classical music that hasn't been oh God, what's the word? Sorry, I'm totally blanking. Engraved.
Okay.
There's been a lot of music in Baroque and classical music that hasn't been engraved, and right now we wait for professors to do it. But just like CAPTCHA, often you would go into a website and identify different street signs and stuff for a computer. I really think that there's a possibility that we have a lot of musicians who are able to identify what 4 notes are in this bar. And so my hope is that I'll create another website that will allow people to basically, the hive mind, to help an engine engrave Baroque and classical pieces of music that are just kind of hanging out in the ether, so we can get kind of a rejuvenation of early music. And so that's not something else that I'm working on, but that's called Musmatics. And but basically my website, pauljohnrudoi.com.
Awesome. You know, an interesting thing about the CAPTCHA, not only were they using that to verify humanity, but that was machine algorithmic learning as well, because they would take the image and a human would say what's in the image, and then the computer was able to confirm that. So as Google was, and Babelfish and all those other groups, as they were digitizing all these books, and they would be able to increase the accuracy of translation and digitization because of the machine learning based on CAPTCHA.
Isn't that amazing? It's amazing. And I think that the next step's similar to like Facebook being like the first iteration, and the next iteration would be like a variety of different smaller pockets. I feel like the same goes for something like this, where you have people with specializations. Like there are a lot of people who actually do know music well enough to be able to do something like this, but they're just a smaller part of a segment of the population. But they could help create something more specific, like engraved scores. So one day. Paul, this has been tremendous. Thank you so much for your time. I really value what you're doing, and I value your opinion, and that you've been willing to share it with me and with the Portfolio Composer. Thank you so much, Garrett. I have to say, what you give is a huge and crucially important resource to any composer and anyone in this field. And I sincerely appreciate all the work that you've done. Thank you. Thank you so much.